Again, let's note the principle. What you've got is an inspired man. Now let's back up. Would everybody agree that Jesus Christ was inspired of God? That seems like a foolish thing to ask in an audience like this, doesn't it? But I found that a lot of times you're better off to say it out loud, just because it kind of states the obvious. People get to where they don't want to argue about things, and then they'll just kind of pass over. But the question is Jesus inspired or not? He's the Son of God. We believe he's inspired. As Christians, that is common ground. And at least in theory, that's going to be common ground between you and a Baptist and a Methodist and whatever. You're going to find that many of those groups have different views of inspiration. But at least generally speaking, you'll find that you can agree with most of the people around you that Jesus is inspired and he speaks the truth. So having said that, verse 15, it says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's in the housetop must not go down to get the things out of his house. And of course, don't go back and what have you. So let's just hold here and turn to Daniel chapter 9 and look at the passage Jesus is talking about. Again, my normal recommendation to people to overcome what I would call the forget it factor. Have you noticed that you'll have a discussion at church, you'll get into a discussion with your neighbor, then you go nuts trying to remember the passages you used at church? It's like, what was that? Anyway, my recommendation to people is to choose a passage as kind of an anchor that you can remember. And for the general discussions over the end of the world or the destruction of Jerusalem, I like Matthew 24 and 25. They're kind of the centerpiece of Jesus' group of prophecies. So, and kind of make your notes there. And in this case, you've got the reference in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15, but he's referring back to Daniel chapter 9. So you would want to make a note that would take you back there. And let's note something. 70 weeks, verse 24, have been decreed for your people. This is the passage dealing with the 70 weeks of Daniel. Now, here's the interesting thing. People take those weeks and divide them up in different ways, and many of them, the 7 years of tribulation and things that you'll hear coming up, come out of varying interpretations of that. Look specifically at verse 26 and 27. And let's just look at that for a minute. After the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its ends will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. He will make a firm covenant with many for a week, but in the middle of the week he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed and is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Now, most of the time, especially in the Pentecostal churches, they will make a big division between like the 62 and the firm covenant with many and the breaking of the covenant and that sort of thing. What I want you to notice is that when you get to the end of this discussion, you're still dealing with the desolation, the abomination of desolation. In verse 26, he's going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. And at the end, he is, verse 27, the one who makes desolate even to a complete destruction. One who is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Now here's my point. Looking at Matthew 24 and verse 15, even if you know nothing of world history, and it helps to know a lot about world history, but even if you know nothing about world history, using Jesus' comment in Matthew 24 and verse 15. If you want to hold this or whatever, turn back over there and notice something about verse 15. Matthew 24 and verse 15. Jesus tells those people that they are going to see this. So when somebody today, living 2,000 years later, comes along and starts trying to apply this to our day and time, you have got to have some mighty old people in this world. Because there were people standing there that he promised would see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. And that there would be a direct response to seeing this, and that was, don't hesitate, don't pass go, don't collect $200, get. and that's it. I mean, as you look at this, he kind of elaborates, I don't care what your excuse is, get now and get out of here. Now, to kind of put this into a perspective, I figured out the exact distances up in Las Vegas, and I was giving him the third degree on the third degree on distances as you look off into the future. But basically, to mentally connect to this, to relate to what he's telling them, in Jerusalem was a mountain city. So when he says flee to the mountains, he's talking about someplace else. Jerusalem had to come down off of the mountains, cross the Jordan River, and go up the mountains on the other side to be safe. If they didn't make it across the river, the Romans would get them. Now, let me give you an idea, because this is going to have a relevance to us when we talk about the rapture here in just a minute. But the Jews were pretty, I don't know what you would call innovative people. They were bound and determined to save their lives. And Jesus makes a play on that. He who saves his life shall lose it. He who loses his life for my sake shall find it. He plays on the physical life versus the spiritual life. About 20 years ago, my house burnt down. While it was burning down, I was standing at the back door looking in and saw all of the records for my business sitting just about 15 feet inside the door. And the house is burning down around me. Now, it freaked my wife out, but guess what I did? I ran into that burning house because I was scareder of the IRS than I was of the house collapsing down around my head. And the irony is that's what Jesus is also telling his people. Your life here really doesn't make much difference. All kidding aside, if the house had fallen down around me, the IRS would have been the least of my problems. It would have been her problem. It would have been the least of my problems. And when it says don't go back into the house, don't do that's what it's talking about. We have a place called Hermit's Peak up there, and it's about the same distance they had to run. As you look off on the horizon, what'd you say that was? 20 miles, 30 miles or something? That's not far enough. It's like 60 miles or so. So these people had to come down a mountain, cross a river, and go back up the other side to be safe. Now, if the prayer here about not doing it on the Sabbath day, if it fell on a Sabbath day and they went more than a Sabbath day's journey, they had a group of people called the Zealots. And one of them was an apostle. You remember Simon the Zealot? Basically, they were terrorists. We think we get to, since we forget our history, we think we're the only generation to deal with this or that. The Zealots were Jewish terrorists that were bound and determined to get rid of Rome. They were known for their knives. They were very good with knives and daggers. And their ultimate aim in life was to catch a Roman army guy, not necessarily a centurion, but anybody in the army, to catch them off in a dark alley and slit their throats. They were very, very, very good at it. But they also enforced the Sabbath day. So if they had to run that far with whatever goods they could carry on the Sabbath day, the Zealots would get it. The least of their problems would be the Romans. Their own Jewish brethren would slit their throats and leave them to die or leave them lay out in the country. So that's why. Now, the other thing is trying to save your gold. The Jews figured out that if they swallowed their gold, they literally would take their gold coins and eat them. Unfortunately, the Romans figured that out. So if the Romans caught a Jew, woe unto the women that are pregnant, the Roman would literally rip you open with a sword and inspect your belly to see if you had gold in your belly. And by trying to save their life, they lost their life. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. These people were so caught up in this world's goods that by trying to save themselves, they put everybody at risk. And anyway, so that was kind of the thing. They needed to be able to get about 60 miles or so in a run with whatever it was they decided to carry. So
we had a Revelation class a couple of years ago. We talked about this, that flight from Jerusalem.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of that church historians, what the world calls church fathers, claim that not a single Christian was left in Jerusalem upon the siege. But one of the things that was stated, I think it was Eusebius, said that most of the Christians fled to Pella, which is about 80 miles. But I kind of question that because that was in a valley. That was in the Jordan Valley.
Because of the Jordan Valley?
Yeah, Pella would have been in the Jordan Valley, not necessarily in the mountains.
Yeah, and it's kind of across and north, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know that they had to get that far to be safe, but they tended to kind of migrate and reorient themselves there. There was a large group that made it there. And now, I'll pick on Steve. I sent him a link to the material I prepared on this. It's too large to just print everybody off one, but he could forward the link to you. I've got several of the historians' accounts just kind of stuck in there at the end, so you can actually read what has come down to us about the destruction of Jerusalem. It's a significant thing. So, anyway, yeah, they had to get any place on this side of the river, you were dead. They would either want your goods, obviously, if you were carrying anything, they wanted that, or they wanted to sell you. But the problem is there were too many Jews for the market. So eventually, this is to me mind-boggling, a human life, human being, they couldn't make money taking them, shipping them, walking them down to the ports in Egypt, and shipping them out and selling their entire life's wages. I mean, slavery is brutal. But how in the world you could get to the point that you couldn't make money selling a man's entire lifespan of work is beyond me. But they literally glutted the market to the point that they would take only the best and they would kill off the rest. They probably would not have killed everybody if the message, I guess, hadn't gone out about the Jews being full of gold. That by trying to save that, they ended up really destroying the stragglers because they were inspecting everyone. You know that it is so foreign to our lifestyle, it's even hard to wrap your heads around it. What actually was going to happen is that these people would be stripped naked, marched wherever they went. If they fell out, probably the closest thing in our memory to this would be the Bataan Death March during World War II. That's really the closest thing that we've got that even comes in the same arena. But they wouldn't allow them to have clothing because they could conceal weapons. And so they basically, you were stripped naked, you were chained together, and marched wherever you went. And it was just brutal. Anyway, so that is part of the abomination aspect there in verse 15 that goes. You can avoid that, but you need to avoid that. In other words, if you're stupid enough to stay around and get caught in that, your blood's on your own head. So we know there were actually two things happened there. And this would, I didn't say that, hang on a minute. Well, I want to look at verse 21 first, and then we'll look at verse 22. But the other note I would give you in connection with verse 15 would be Luke 21:20. And obviously that's Luke's account. And Jesus, gives them their sign in that case. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So you end up, by comparing the accounts, you can kind of pull the pieces together. There is a sign when the armies are coming you need to get. Now, having said that, look at verse 21. Today, people are going nuts trying to figure out the Great Tribulation. There will be a great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world and until now never will. Again, you need to note, verse 34, this is still something that's going to occur in this generation. These people will see this. And if you make notes off on the side of verse 34, I'd recommend Mark 13:30 as a note there. Mark records the same thing, that it'll occur in that generation. But now, in connection with verse 21, I would recommend Revelation chapter 1 and verse 9. When we get into the book of Revelation, and obviously these studies are going to start meshing together at some point, people today are looking for the Great Tribulation and placing it into our future. People make reference in the middle of the book of Revelation to the tribulation also. What they overlook in Revelation 1 and verse 9, again at the beginning, like we started, we looked at the initial questionings, if you will, in verses 1 through 3. But what they overlook is that John said he was in the tribulation. The tribulation not only is going to occur in their lifetime, by the time the book of Revelation is written, the tribulation has begun. He says that he is a partaker of the tribulation. So the tribulation, it's kind of like that discussion over the Antichrist. During World War II, people thought Hitler was the Antichrist. During the last administration, the Republicans thought Obama was the Antichrist. Today, the Democrats think Trump is the Antichrist. About all you can do is laugh, isn't it? I mean, you just kind of, it's either that or go crazy. But the reality check here is that we need to realize John, 1 John, tells us that they're already afoot in the world. So, I mean, how in the world can you take something that your Bible says is already underway and then just catapult it 2,000 years into the future and say it's going to start in our lifetime? That's nuts. I mean, it literally destroys other people's conversations. We're reading his conversations, and he's warning his people. He loves these people. They have no reason to get caught in this if they'll pay attention to it. Now, if they ignore him, they got a problem. And that's kind of an important part of the equation. So, unless these days have been cut short, or is there any questions about that before we move on? That tribulation drives people nuts. But,
what would be, people might argue, well, this tribulation is just talking about the hard times that the apostles went through and Christ went through, whatever. It really had nothing to do with the end of the world.
okay.
How would you answer that?
I would agree with it. Sometimes they're making a distinction without a difference. The end of the world has no tribulation attached to it. That once we get into Matthew 25, what's important in your homework, read Matthew 24, Matthew 25 together. What's important is that they ask for signs, and he gives them signs about Jerusalem. There are no signs on the end of the world. When it goes, it's gone. And people are not going to be able to run. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. It's just over. I mean, when they make that observation, that's one of the places you say, well, at least we agree on that. But let me point something else out, and then, no, there are no signs given for that, so.
Well, didn't he even say he didn't know, and also it come like a thief in the night?
Yes, now, that, again, that's kind of an important part of the equation. Now, tonight I'll go into a Jewish wedding. I'm going to avoid doing that here, just because I don't want to be so repetitive you don't want to come back. But once you actually have the imagery of a Jewish wedding in the back of your head, you're going to find it coming up everywhere. Because he structures this like a wedding, and structures Matthew 25 like a parable of the 10 virgins. It's structured around a Jewish wedding. John 14 is structured around a Jewish wedding, and we're going to go into some of that. But yeah, the end of the world, there's no warning, it will just happen, and that's the major difference. Let me see here. The cutting short of the days is a significant thing. Generally, that is cross-reference to verse 40 and 41 by the world, and they draw the concept of a rapture from this. Probably bring this up a couple of times this week, but one of the things I would recommend to you, and I want to jump to verse 41 and then we'll come back, but look at 40 and 41. 2 men will be in a field, one will be taken, one will be left. 2 women will be grinding in a wheat, one will be taken, one will be left. This is the classic passage dealing with the idea of a selective rapture. I can remember when I was in school, somebody brought a bunch of papers to school, and it looked like a newspaper, and had a headline on it that said millions missing, and they were handing these things out. And of course, the whole series, movies, a good movie, good Hollywood, I guess, bad Bible, but there's a whole series of movies called The Left Behind, and the people that are left behind in the rapture. I want you to notice something. If you make notes in your Bible, and we're going to turn there, I would recommend that you make a note from verse 41 over to Luke 17 and verse 35. And let's turn over there. Now, in Luke 17, my Bible has actually got a bad heading there. In verse 20, above verse 22, my Bible says the second coming foretold. And I would recommend you just, they're wrong. I mean, it's not referring to the second coming at all. Now, you have the kind of the early run. I noted with you before, Luke 17, Luke 19, Luke 21, where you're dealing with, in 3 settings, the destruction of Jerusalem. So, you might note, let's back up to verse 20, just to kind of put this, give you some notes, put it in a perspective. In verse 20, the Pharisees are questioning him about the coming of the kingdom of God. And you'll note that the first response is the kingdom of God's not coming with signs to be observed. It's coming in their midst. Now, today we would identify that properly with the day of Pentecost. The day of the kingdom did not come with signs to come. But then he begins to describe what happens after the kingdom of God. And the days will come when you long to see one of the days of the Son of Man. You'll not see him. The reason is that Jesus is no longer walking the earth. He's ruling for heaven. First, in verse 25, he's got to suffer a bunch of things and be rejected. Obviously, we know that as the crucifixion, don't we? As we're kind of walking down through it. Then you'll notice, beginning with verse 26, you have the similar language to what you had in Matthew 24. The days of Noah, and that sort of thing. And it picks right up with verse 28, Lot. What happened when they looked back? Well, it was bad for them, wasn't it? And then on that day, verse 31, the guy who's in the housetop, don't go back for your goods. And verse 33 is the reference that I've been noting multiple times. If you try to save your life, what's going to happen to you? You're going to lose your life. Trying to save this world's goods, your quality of life, you're going to destroy it. Now, okay, let's settle in there. Take a deep breath and note verse 34. I'll tell you, on that night there will be two in a bed, one will be taken, one will be left. There will be two women grinding in the same place, one will be taken, one will be left. Two men will be in a field, one will be taken, one will be left. If you don't take anything else out of here this morning, you want to note verse 37. They reacted the same way you would. Remember, the apostles were real people, real human beings. They didn't understand. So how did they react? They asked a question. Taken where? I mean, that's their response. Taken what? Where are you going to take them? Well, where the body is, the vultures are gathered together. What did vultures gather around? Yeah. So the people left behind. Take this series of movies they had. The people left behind are the people walking around alive in the movie. But the people left behind, in this case, they're dead. They're the ones that the Romans ripped their bellies open and left them laying in the field. The others, reality check here, the others that are taken away to slavery. So they're going to be taken to the markets around the world and sold off. But the vultures are going to get the ones that are left behind. So anyway, questions or comments? That's actually a big deal for our community around here. They'll pull the passage without the context. And no matter if you know nothing of history, and again I'll make this point, I can identify it from history, having read Josephus and read all these different things. But if you know absolutely nothing from history, all you know is an open Bible. The one basic principle that you have every right to push hard is the fact that if you're going to look for the fulfillment of this prophecy of Jesus, you should be able to find it in that generation. You don't want to look in our generation because we lived 2,000 years too late. But that generation would live to see whatever it is he's talking about. So you don't have to have Josephus or Herodotus or any of those guys. Now, I enjoy reading them because I also teach this in a teenage evidences class. When Jesus makes a promise like this or a threat, you better pay attention because his threat at every single level came to pass. So, the one we've got hanging is the judgment. I cannot afford to go into the judgment and blow it there. Can you? You've got one shot. And that is the practical application of this discussion.
And it seems, and I think you hit on this, that all of the interpretations, quote unquote, that are associated with the end, the surrounding events are very tumultuous. A lot of horrible stuff going on. And I want to throw this out at you. I may be looking at it wrong, but I always go to 1 Thessalonians 5, the first 3 verses, because that scene doesn't seem to be very tumultuous. It doesn't seem to have much to do with turmoil and persecution. But it says, now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. Is that a wrong?
No, that's absolutely appropriate. Nowhere to run, no real warning. You're going to be asleep. And I would connect it with verse 44 of Matthew 24. The one safe time you probably had, if you were bound, determined to go out and sin, you should have done it on September the 23rd. The reality check is that Jesus says, he's coming at a time you don't think he will. If everybody's standing around saying, today's the end of the world, That's the one safe thing you got. 'Cause, what he's telling us is that they're not going to be looking for him when he shows up. And that's probably the best indication of it. And when these people start spouting this stuff off, they've obviously overlooked the obvious as you look at verse 44, haven't they? Because if they're swearing this is the end of the world, that's not the end of the world. And that's really the closest that I know as far as a practical thing. Now, when am I in trouble on time? Am I already out of time? Or?
In verse 4, where it says that you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, see that you're not troubled. Right there, Christ is telling you, a lot of people will have whether hurricanes or whatever it is. There's people who say, oh, the end of the world and all. That's not the sign Christ is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be earthquakes, they're going to be, hurricanes, whatever, but that's not the sign he's talking about. But, and you go back to verse 14, which is, verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached. That, we got to do that before the end of the world.
So,
Tell us to preach the gospel.
yeah, and it will carry throughout. So, probably want to underline the phrase in verse 25. Behold, I have told you in advance. This is not an accidental prophecy or anything. He is purposely laying out his credentials as a prophet. That is the point. Now, one objection that comes up all the time is verse 29 and 30. 31. Surely that hasn't come to pass yet. And as we read it in our language, we're prone to agree with that. But it's kind of like that word manana that I gave you. It does translate as tomorrow in English. But if you go to this culture, tomorrow doesn't necessarily mean tomorrow. It's very different in application from the way it translates from one language to another. The other illustration I like to use is any of you, I look around and most of you are older. You go back and start talking to a teenager. Have you noticed that they have a different language using the same words? When I was a kid, if we had a pretty girl that we were discussing, we'd talk about, man, she is cool. I noticed a few years ago that somehow or another, it went to she is hot. So, when I look at my wife, is she cool or is she hot? When people say the Bible contradicts itself, that's normally what they've fallen into. All kidding aside, I've illustrated, that's a humorous illustration, but that's normally what they've fallen into. If you try to translate that to another language in another time, good luck with that. But it's the same words and it's the same language, but it's used very, very differently depending on